The police officer awoke to a Manchester rain that lightly pattered on his luminous yellow coat, and he instinctively let out a groan. He didn't know why he had groaned, and didn't even know where he was, let alone why he was lying outside in the rain. Parts of him started hoping it was a consequence of a heavy night of drinking, but then the events of what just happened slowly came together. Out of nowhere, an excruciating pain very belligerently screamed in his head, and he looked down at the mangled mess both his legs were in. A pathetic whimper crept out of his mouth. A different pain coming from his testicles then pushed through to join in. This new hurt helped to remind the police officer that before his vicious beating he had already been having a bad day. The thought that D.C. Tina Bosworth has earlier brutally shot down his romantic advances popped into his mind. Tina was everything he wanted. She was blonde, had a perfect smile with the cutest dimples, hypnotic green eyes, perky breasts that ignored gravity, and a bottom so delectable that he felt the urge to bite it every time he saw it. When they had a drunken fumble after the Christmas work due, he felt it was going to be the start of a lustful romance. However, she did not feel the same. Following this drunken mistake, Tina thought she had made it clear to a policeman that it was just a one-off, and that she had only gone with him because she had drunk enough alcohol to kill an entire waddle of nuns. The police officer saw it differently and thought perhaps persistence and a further flash of his charm would be the way to make her his. Unfortunately, he was devoid of any actual charm, and his actions quite easily fell into the category of sexual harassment. After what must have been a month's worth of such behaviour, Tina felt she had to make it very clear she wasn't going to be his. She did this by making a number of clear and concise points while squeezing the officer's testicles to the point where he nearly fainted. She was not going to let repeated sexual innuendo and outright fuck propositions, lecherous groping, and the sending off a multitude of dick pics carry on. She then put it quite bluntly that should he continue, she would first castrate him with her bare hands, then feed him his own testicles and get him fired for sexual harassment. Even after being beaten and left mangled in the Manchester rain, the police officer still winced about the whole ordeal with Tina. He had never encountered such an unreasonable reaction before. It was not that such forms of romancing never actually worked. It was more that the female officer in question would usually end up transferring to a different team or quit from force entirely. Either way, they were easily forgotten. But the officer didn't think he was going to easily forget Tina, and felt that she had bruised his ego permanently. The officer let out another groan as he remembered how he was so excited when the call out about black ewes in the park came through, whilst he was nursing his testicles with someone else's frozen ready meal in the staff room. After the attempted castration by Tina, the officer found that his emotional state deteriorated to levels where he questioned whether he should even be a police officer any longer. Such dour trains of thought started with feeling that he deserved more respect for the work he did. He couldn't understand why people didn't realise that it wasn't easy hurting criminals. Sure, a few innocent criminals got him away, but that was just the way it was. Well, that was what it used to be like before the advent of a smartphone. He moped in the thought that once that happened, a police officer couldn't take a bloody piss in the bushes, let alone kick someone's head in without some snotty teenager recording them. Suddenly an officer was famous for all the wrong reason, and his superiors then had to do something about it. He knew that there would be people who would consider suspension with full pay whilst an investigation was pending, quite a let-off for slamming a person's head into the pavement multiple times. But they didn't see the other side of it. Granted, the investigation was just a formality, but the boredom at home was intolerable, especially as it meant spending more time with two bratty children and an increasingly rotund wife. The officer's mood had perked up out of his dark ruminations when that deceptive call-out came in about the black youths. It was happening in a park where he knew there was no CCTV, and he also felt that there would be unlikely any bystanders with smartphones ready to record every move at that time of night. At that moment, the officer had been filled with excitement, and what had happened with Tina simply became fuel for passive aggression of the most violent kind. Of course, all that positive energy dissipated when a man wearing a balaclava broke both his legs. "Tim, Tom, Matt, fuck, you guys alright?" the officer called out to his fellow policemen. The pat of the rain was the only reply. He reached for his radio, but for some unknown reason it wasn't receiving or sending any signals, even though it appeared fine. The police officer muttered a few expleets and thought it must have got damaged in the fight. He tried to turn over so he could crawl to one of the other officers, but the slightest movement caused pain so nauseating that he threw up all over his own shoulder and face. The police officer let out a roar of frustration at the skies and immediately whimpered. It popped into his head that eventually backup would be sent to see what had happened and they would find the injured officers. Whilst the policeman stared into the orange abyss above, the thought of Tina was pushed out of his mind and he unwillingly projected the memory of her beating into his head. Over and over again. It was as if he was strapped down and forced to repeatedly watch the savagery. Each time Reel got to the crack of his bones, it caused him to flinch and moan in pain. Strangely, each time the events played through his mind, the officer felt a familiar feeling grow. He could not quite pinpoint why. Again the reel played, and he started to see something he recognised about the masked man. At first he couldn't quite put his finger on it, but then he realised it was Masked Man's eyes. He had seen those eyes filled with rage and joy before. It finally clicked. He had come across one of those same eyes at the Youth Offenders Institute he was once a guard at, and it was someone who had passionately loathed the pain his rage would cause. But before the policeman could organise the clutter files in his head to remember who the culprit was exactly, a cruel laugh slowly and sadistically cut through the night. Ha! Ha! One of the things that unsettled him the most about the horrible laugh was it sounded as if the pitch came from every octave, high and low. I say, you do have to commend the young chap. You bloody well do. He's tickled me through and through. The peculiar voice exclaimed in a quintessential English accent. The officer calmed himself and thought that he must have endured a head injury, which is why the voice sounded so strange. He grimaced through the pain, pushed himself up onto his behind and looked around, but then he saw a black Scottish terrier sitting nearby. He could have sworn he saw the dog smile. "Mate, where are you? We need your help. Please, you call police and ambulance for us now," the policeman ordered. "Absolutely marvellous way you snapped your legs like twigs. The noise and look on your face, my word, is absolutely priceless. I think my favourite part was when he punched your friend right in the knackers. I can tell you something, your friend certainly won't be having children anymore." The voice then burst out into shrill, joyful laughter that horribly pricked the officer's skin all over. Half of the policeman was feeling disbelief, and the other half was feeling something he had not felt since he was a child. Abject terror. He gulped and felt that his day was going to get even worse, something of which he was quite right about. "Oi, listen here, you fuck. If you don't want to be arrested later given a right good kicking, you better call police right now. Well, the other police, I mean," the police officer screamed. He frantically looked around, but only saw the little dog falling onto his back and then rubbing itself against the ground. The animal got up and stared right at the policeman. The constable instinctively closed his eyes, and for a reason he could not explain, he started to pray. The officer was not a religious man, but he felt an urge to try and contact a higher power, as he could feel that something very terrible was about to happen. That was when he heard a few other groans from his fellow officers. The noise was a cue of action for the little dog, especially as he knew that another group of officers was exactly 2 minutes and 57 seconds away. Before the constable could open his eyes and check on his comrades, he heard gurgles and muted screams from all around him. The policeman opened his eyes and saw that all his comrades had disappeared, and there, just in front of him, was a sneering black Scottish terrier. He could not help but to think that perhaps his brain was damaged far worse than it had seemed. "Guys, where are you? Seriously, where have you gone? I need you!" the policeman meekly cried. The little dog got up and trotted closer to the police officer, who was still frantically looking around. The canine walked up to one of the officer's legs where snapped white bone jutted out of his ripped trouser leg, and gave it a vicious little kick. The man wailed from a tidal wave of pain that crashed into his brain. "Fucking little shit!" the police officer snarled. He pulled a large metallic torch from his belt and went to swipe the grinning little critter, but it went straight through the canine and hit the ground. "What the?" Before the officer could finish his sentence, the dog's head melted into a rapidly growing and swirling sea of nightmarish black liquid that filled the air around it like an ink dropped into water. The liquid suddenly shot out and enveloped the policeman. At first he closed his eyes in terror, but when after a couple of seconds he felt nothing had happened, he opened them to find that he was in a place where there was no light, only a terrifying and endless abyss all around him. It was as if he floated on a still sea in this haunting place. The sound of chattering teeth menacingly chimed all around him. The man could only whimper in response. The sound grew and grew to a deafening volume, and within a split second, thousands of tiny mouths with jagged teeth suddenly came flying out from every angle and shredded him. The black abyss immediately and gluttonously drank up the bloody remains of the officer. The little dog burped with satisfaction. Then the critter looked around and gave a little pout as it realized it had eaten all the police officers, and far too quickly. It thought to itself that it must remember to savour the meat and enjoy the flavour more next time. The little dog sighed. It deliberated whether to reverse time to have the meal again, but decided not to, as that would have been breaking the rules to a degree that it would not have felt comfortable with. The cute animal gave a little shrug to itself and merrily trotted away, following the scent of its newfound toy.